Now we would like to speak about agitation and propaganda. With this brief session, we would like to set the basic definitions and some of the key questions on art and ideology and their role in revolutionary movements, organizational elements, and the importance of strategies. Agitation and propaganda is the relation between the form and the substance of the message that we communicate to the masses, and between the information and feelings. It is the anchor of understanding from our daily lives the world we live in and that we want to mobilize for transformation. We will see that, for us, this is a strategy and a political practice in the struggle for the hegemony from the fields of culture, art, and ideology, always in relation with the context of social mobilization and the organizational tools of the working class. This text of Lenin that we have extracted from What is to be Done in 1902 explains this difference between propaganda and agitation. Until now, we thought that if a propagandist tried to, for instance, approach or address the problem of unemployment, he or she must explain the capitalist nature of the crisis and show the cause that makes this inevitable in current society, to expose the need to transform capitalist society into a socialist one, etc. In one word, he or she must communicate many ideas, so many that all of them jointly will be able to be assimilated in the act only by a few, relatively few people. On the contrary, the agitator, when speaking about this same problem, will take an example, the most notable one or well known by the audience. Let's say, for instance, a family of unemployed people who are also struggling against hunger or who are living in misery, and will explain this fact known by all through efforts to try to include the concept of mass in one single idea. An absurd idea in the contradiction between the increase of wealth and the increase at the same time of misery. He or she will try to awaken in the mass the indignation against this flagrant injustice, leaving the propagandist with the complete or full explanation of this contradiction. There are many definitions for agitation and propaganda, and the definition has changed throughout time. Agitation and propaganda, which have an inevitable red thread in history, is not only a discipline that we have worked together from revolutionary organizations. As a matter of fact, Joseph Goebbels was the father of Nazi propaganda and was also responsible for the Ministry of Propaganda and Popular Education, which was created by Adolf Hitler when he came into power in 1933. We will see this with some examples. First of all, we will see that the term propaganda goes back to the Catholic Church, the Congregation of Cardinals, the Propaganda Fide, which was established in 1622 by the Sacred Congregation for the Propaganda of the Faith, was responsible for propagating the Catholic religion. The root agit has many exceptions and many different uses as well. For example, it has been used literally in war times, in England, in the Civil War, in the mid-18th century, where it was used through the word agitator to refer to the delegates of the soldiers of the parliamentary army. The combination of agitation and propaganda, or the word agitprop, has its origins in the revolutionary Russia. Thus, we can see how these words have gone throughout history, through the church, through wars, and through revolutions. Also, this rich and varied history expresses also a great diversity in the way of understanding the different organizations and regions. But we can also find some common elements. It could be said that agitation and propaganda are the activities that could be described as public actions in order to awaken the conscience or awareness, and also to promote the adhesion and the combating and struggling of population and people. Also, during the Russian Revolution, there was an awakening of civic art with the object of legitimizing revolution. This was aimed to a public of masses that wanted to have an active reaction and also have the participation of citizens in the revolutionary process. Thus, arts have a very important role in disseminating new values. The relations between arts and revolutionary transformation of society are evident during revolutions. There is a clear line established in Europe from the French Revolution onwards in order to expand the Commune of Paris, the Paris Commune, and the revolution that took place in October 1917 that was later generalized during the aftermath of World War I. And these are good examples of the 20th century. We can also find them in Mexican muralism, the May French of 1968, or the Revolution in Portugal, among many other examples. But we could also mention that the Revolution of 1789 was a starting point, and that painter Jacques-Louis David was the model of the artist that was committed with the Republican cause. His assassinated Marat, could be considered as the Republican Pieta. The tradition was maintained during the Commune with artists like Courbet in order to go to an eclosion, even richer during the Russian Revolution. Here we find Rudzenko, Popova, Stepanova, Sergei Eisenstein, or Mayakovsky, who are also good examples of revolutionary artists that took part of the discussion on how to build a new world and how to build a new man and woman and their relation with the arts at the service of transformation and change. For example, in 1789, it was urgent to have a social transformation, and Lunatarsky, the Commissariat of the People for Education, self-described as the poet of the revolution, undoubtedly affirmed that arts could provide revolution with a language. In the years of the Russian Revolution, there was an agitprop strategy based on establishing throughout the whole country a number of centers, educational centers, that were aimed at organizing propaganda plans, but also for agitation. They were called agitpunkti. These places of meeting had libraries, schools, canteens, theaters, and cinemas. They combined permanent activity with ships, trains, transport, but also agitprop that went there for political action that was considered the most urgent and necessary. These transports also had libraries inside, but also small printing stores to produce small publications. The external decoration was very evocative and made them special when small parts of population arrived. Boris Arbatov, in his text on art and production, speaks about art in the history of the working movement, because art is always developed in emptiness. He describes how, from a turning point in the 19th century, the working class movement acquired enough dimensions to have an important influence in the artistic life of society, of capitalist society, but due to exploitation and a low cultural level, could only find themselves subjugated to the bourgeois traditions and their aesthetics. An intelligentsia started to work, but was still repeating the same bourgeois values or schemes of beauty, of possession, and superficial aspects and decorations, as William Morris states, with the class organizations, their buildings, and adequate spaces. We go back to the question of art, but this time with even more resources, with the slogan, "Let's proletarize art." There was an understanding of how to democratize the arts, that is to say, on how to disseminate the media and the resources of the working class, their aesthetics, their values, instead of the bourgeois. With the revolution in October, Russian art was something new, an avant-garde. Museums started to show works of Tatlin, Malevich, or Kandinsky. But, as we previously mentioned, agitprop is also used by other ideologies, like Goebbels during Nazism, or the Works Projects Administration, WPA, that in the United States with Roosevelt started a strategy in 1935 to stabilize economy and incorporate the New Deal in the soul of the country. From the WPA, many millions of people were hired, artists, musicians, writers, and in general, people who were creative. The government used these people, these creative people, to produce propaganda for the New Deal, such as signs or posters that tried to promote events for the government or to provide services for American citizens and provided, for example, art lessons. There is no absence of communication if we do not have a clear strategy that is well organized and that establishes concepts, values, and the resignification of common sense in society. We will find that history will show us that it is possible, that we do have a tradition, a revolutionary tradition in the arts and culture that also belong to us. This is an open discussion, thus, where we can reflect from our own organizations and where we can struggle in the battle of ideas. Organizational elements. In the revolutionary processes, there are always men and women organized for communication, arts, culture, and agitprops. Signs, posters, journals, drama, music, there have always been a revolutionary ecosystem, but it is not enough by taking the phone and calling a friend who is a musician for a festival that we are organizing. We must go beyond this. We must develop in our organizations and platforms spaces to work together, to put this into practice. But we must also have debates, discussions, training, connect each other with the world of culture, with its field. Culture not as an external element, something that belongs to capitalism and the cultural industries, but as something of our nature, of our popular culture, that is also something that is natural in our social reality, self-organized reality, that allow artists to go beyond and create culture. As, for example, Agitation and Propaganda was a department that was part of the Central Committee and the regional committees of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This would later go on to be named as the Ideological Department. Emory Douglas was the Minister of Culture of the Party of the Black Panthers and a good example and well-known example of a revolutionary artist at that time that used images in posters, signs, flyers in order to disseminate a certain type of aesthetic that was in the nature of the movement and that still today is an international icon, very well known. Thus, there is a clear relation between organizational forms and political communication that help us to reflect and develop with our militants and comrades the collective sense of our organizations. This is a very diverse framework because when we speak about agitprop, we probably think about some of those favorite well-known posters from OSPAL, Black Panthers, May 68, or the Signs of the Chinese Revolution. This is the reason why it might be surprising for us to, for example, include here sports, since they are not usually considered as a social phenomenon in European countries, at least on the western side. Nonetheless, in Russia, the Communist Party affirmed in 1925 that sports cannot be considered only in terms of physical education, but also as the ways or the means to educate the masses, because it was facilitating the development of wellness and also of working in teams of people, teamwork. Besides this, sports represented an opportunity to integrate the majority of workers in the organizations of the party, which meant that there was something that was ideal as the means for agitation. Here we have more key elements. To organize ourselves through social phenomena, education, transfer of values is something essential to boost the organized working class. This example of sports is also something to express that it is not just the graphic format what defines agitprop. It is something that goes beyond, and it is an activating framework to raise awareness from our daily lives, to have dialogue with the rest of the working class. It is a way for us to transfer our ideas, debates, to boost our socialist values. And this means that there are many possibilities to do so. If we start from the material reality of our local environment, of our spaces of activism, of our flags of struggle, we can develop different ways of communication or organization, collective, popular, democratic, participatory, and which can also create multiple formats and activities. As Arbatov once said, this is a utopia, but we must express it. It is true that the situation is tragic, but there is a way out. It is the situation of a person who needs to go to the other side of the river. What he or she has to do is to start by setting the main steps in order to build a bridge. Let's build together those bridges, all of us together.